Hello and welcome to Code Over Time. My name is Kev, and in this video we're going to start to actually get our hands dirty and look at a bit of our code that's running behind Varcade Games. So up until now we have focused on setting up the project, we've explored Varcade Games, we've reverse engineered it a little bit, and now we're going to actually look at the code. So we're going to start with the front end because it's probably most straightforward, and this is the start point for all of the requests that are happening to the server in the back end. Once we've dug into the front end a little bit, we will look at the broader system architecture, but for now, I think it's useful to kind of understand a little bit about how the front end app is structured. So to begin with, our front end is built with Vue.js. So we are actually using currently version 2 of Vue.js, which is a little bit out of date, and I will probably do a bunch of videos, maybe even live streams of the update process to Vue 3, because I think that would be interesting. But to begin with, I think it's worth just going to v2.vuejs.org and just having a little bit of a look at the framework. If you've never used something like React or Vue or something like that in terms of building a website, I think it's always best to come and look at the official docs first. And by the way, this is true of when you start any job, I believe, is that you want to first learn the product, like we talked about in the last video, and at that point you want to look at what is the core kind of technology, and are they using any technology that you aren't familiar with, and then go actually look at some of the official documentation for that technology. So here they've got a nice video that explains, what Vue.js is and why you might want to use it. They've got some getting started documentation here, which basically runs you through what a very basic app looks like. So in this case, you can see that the core of Vue.js is you're kind of mixing HTML and JavaScript, where you can have some HTML, but you can sprinkle in bits of code where you can kind of dynamically populate your HTML with data, which allows us to build a website that's very reactive and kind of feels alive, right? So kind of we can have much more dynamic web pages like Varcade Games. So Vue.js is the framework that we're using for our front end. And what I want to talk about first is how do we actually work with our code? So I've got two tabs open here in my terminal. One of them I'm in the build tools directory, and the other one I'm actually in the website client directory. So the reason I'm in build tools is we've already seen a bunch of useful make commands in this project, like make build and make start to actually build and run our project. We can also do make stop if we want to stop our project. Probably should have covered that earlier. But we can also do make logs, which will show the output of the logs from the containers that are all running. So as we've seen, make ps will show everything that's up and running. And if we do make logs, and this time I'm going to say a equals game-portal-client, because this is the game portal client. This is the user interacts with the client. This is what's happening on the client side, which is on the user's PC. So when we want to look at the logs, we can look at the logs specifically for the game portal. And what we can see here is that there's some percentage thing going on, and there's a whole bunch of statements here that we don't necessarily understand. I'm going to hit enter a couple of times just so we can see when something changes. But at the bottom, we can see the app is running at localhost 8002. Don't worry about network for now, and that corresponds to what we have opened in our browser. Now, the reason I have opened this is because if we open up our code and go to website, client, source first, and then if we go to our index.vue, okay, we can see that there's a bit of HTML, and this is typical again of all of our Vue components when using Vue.js. We'll have a template, so this tag which is a template, and then we'll have some HTML laid out. And in this case, you'll see we've actually got a bunch of custom tags. So anything that you see with WP, this is something that WP stands for the web portal in this case. And these are like components that we've created ourselves. So it's like we've created our own dynamic HTML tags. So rather than having to write a whole bunch of HTML, we can, in this case, create a component. So if we look at the component WP top bar, here you can see the top bar basically has our header. Remember when we reverse engineered in the last video? We had the header, so that's where this is defined. We've also got a login button that says sign in, or if you're signed in, it says logged out. And we can just, because we have created this top bar here, and we've got some code that goes along with it and stuff like that. Let's not worry about the details now. We can just use this WP top bar anywhere we want throughout the rest of the website. But we only need to actually build it once. If we couldn't create components, all of this code would be in this page, and you can see in our game portal we also have WP top bar, so that code would be repeated there. So creating components like this allows us to reduce duplication. Okay, so we're going to go back to our website. I'm going to go to log out. We're back at our home page now. So index.view is our home page. Okay, and what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to select this and I'm going to comment it out. So in Sublime, what I can do to comment it out is when I select any piece of code, I can hold control and press / and that will comment it out. That's just a handy little shortcut. That will be different in depending on your IDE, but if you just want to comment it out manually, you can just do the standard HTML comment and you can comment it out like that. Now if I save this, first of all I want to go look at our terminal. So remember the last time I hit enter a few times to create some spaces? Well, something happened. As soon as I saved that file, it says wait compiling, and now we're back to doing this whole percentage thing, and then it says compiled successfully, and now it says app running at. So when I made that change to the code, something happened on my container that is actually holding the client here. It recompiled. So now when I go back to my browser, you'll see the header is not actually there anymore. It's gone. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that in terms of our developer workflow, when we modify our code, as soon as we save it, I don't even need to refresh the page. I just go back to my browser and it is automatically updated. And that is because basically we are running our code in a way that, let's take a step back. In our container, we have a server set up that is housing our Vue.js code. And that server is basically watching all of the Vue.js files. And whenever one of those files changes, the Vue.js server will say, a file changed. I'm going to rebuild the app, which you saw in the logs. And then it has some logic where it can tell the browser, hey, you need to refresh because some of the code changed. Now, when you're working with Vue.js on your computer, that would all happen on your local file system. But we've set up this project in such a way that changing the code that's on your computer will update the code that's on the container, which will then trigger this whole reload process. And we'll get into the details on how that works later, but the important thing is this is your developer workflow. So all you need to know is that when you're playing around with our website client here, any change you make is going to apply here instantly. So if I uncomment that, save and go back, you'll see my logo is back. So this is developer experience is something that's kind of important. And when you're thinking about when you're working on a large kind of more complex code base, it's important that you can work efficiently, that you can make changes and that they're reflected quickly, and it allows you to work quickly and you can see what you're doing, you can see the impact of what you're doing. And that's why we try and set things up like this. So that is the first thing that I wanted to show in terms of developer workflow and working with a client. The next thing I wanted to show you is we have some tools. When working in JavaScript, it's because JavaScript is not compiled. It's not even necessarily because it's not compiled, but it's very easy to write JavaScript in a very messy way. So if you've got 5 or 6 people working on a project, you could all write your JavaScript slightly differently, and then you end up with a code base where the code in one file looks very different than the code in one file. So what that could look like in terms of how it manifests. So let's say I might write my if statements where I start a block on the next line, and then someone else might start their if statement, or their else in this case, with a curly brace on the same line. Okay, now that might seem trivial, but there's lots of things like this, or maybe someone might always put these spaces in. So you'll have a code base where you've got this really inconsistent style and things are kind of all over the place, and we have some tools at our disposal that allows us to deal with this. And the tool is a linter, and in this case we can basically scan all of our JavaScript, and make sure that the style of our JavaScript conforms to some specific style that works for us. Now, when it comes to linting, we can also detect errors, which is really, really useful, or detect bad code, not errors, let's say bad code. So let's talk about how we do this in this project. The first thing you want to do is in your client directory is do npm install. Now, I've already installed this stuff, so it should be pretty quickly. There's a couple of warnings, and we don't need to worry about those for now. We can just wait for this to install. And then we are done. Now, if you have any issues installing, leave a comment in the question section. There can be issues with permissions and stuff like that. You should be able to Google and find an answer. But if you do get stuck here, please leave a comment. But the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to run npm lint. Okay. Sorry, that's a mistake. I'm going to run npm run lint. And this is going to run our linter, which is basically going to scan all of our code and see are there any problems with the code. In this case, it didn't actually find any issues. So let's introduce an issue. If I go to my main.js file as an example, you can, in JavaScript, you can have a semicolon at the end of every line or not. It's kind of up to you. This is a style decision. And in this case, in all of my code base for Varcade Games, we're not using semicolons. So if I add a semicolon there and now I run lint, what it will do is it will detect that. So it's saying warning, extra semicolon. Now, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to break the code, but we want to just make sure our code is consistent. And the nice thing about this linter is if we do npm run lint fix, it will actually go through and fix that issue for us. So it tells us that the issue has been fixed. It tells us about the file. If I go back to the file, you'll see that semicolon has been removed. Now, I mentioned also that it will find bad code, quote bad code. So if we do something like this. So we've got an if statement here, and there's a couple of problems with this if statement, right? First off, it doesn't do anything. And secondly, it evaluates true all the time. So this is a couple of lines of code that is just completely pointless. It's just cluttering up our code base and it doesn't need to be there. If true, well, if true is always true, so whatever's in this block is always going to be executed. And in this case, there's nothing even in the block. So it's a completely pointless piece of code. So if I go back and run my linter again, it has picked up both of these things. So you can see here it says error, unexpected constant condition. So that's where we're saying this condition is just true. It's always true. It's pointless. And then we're saying empty block statement. So here we've got a block that's empty. So again, that's pointless. Now, if I do run lint fix, it won't actually fix the issue. And if we go back to the code, you can see that it's still here. And we have to get rid of it manually ourselves. Our linter can't really fix more complex issues in the code, but it will highlight them, which is useful and allows us to kind of maintain a cleaner code base. So as you're working on Varcade Games and as you're working on the client, I think those two things are kind of the most important things to be aware of, is that we have this hot reloading where we're changing the code and the changes are being reflected instantly in the website. And whenever we do make changes, we will we can run our linter and we can make sure that our code, first of all, conforms to the style that we want it to conform to, and that it is not bad code, in quotes. So let's go to our game portal. So this is the main page. You can see when we go to gameportal.view. So first off, we have kind of we have four main views here, right? So these are the correspond to the four main pages we have on our website. So we have our index page, which is our index.view. If we hit sign in, right, we have our login.view, so that's this page. If we continue as guest or if we log in, we have our game portal view, which is this one. And this should be immediately familiar because you'll see we have a root container you might have seen earlier on when we were doing our reverse engineering. Then we have active game, single player game, multiplayer game. You can kind of see these things sprinkled throughout the page. So straight away you can kind of get a sense of what you're looking at here. And then we have the gameplay.view. And the gameplay.view is when we actually play a game. That's this page. So we basically have a different view for each of our main pages of our website. And then those pages are built up of different components. So as I said, on our index page, we have our top bar here. And this top bar, if we open WP top bar, you can see we've got the HTML that controls that. Okay, so we have, first off, our header. Let's ignore this bit for a minute. So we have a router link. This is basically a Vue.js construct that allows us to kind of provides a structured way to link around the page or the entire website. We won't dig too deep into the details of that right now, but we've got our header, and this is a router link, and it's linking to /. So this is what I said earlier, or in the previous video, when you click the logo, it will bring you back to the home page. Then we have an if statement, which is interesting because HTML doesn't normally have if statements, right? So if you're not used to, again, using something like React or Angular or Vue, this might seem weird. But basically v dash, that's how we know it's a Vue statement. So this is a Vue.js thing. And we have some conditions. So we're saying if this condition is true, we want to show this div. Okay. So we have a button here for sign in and a button for log out. Now, first off, show login option. What does that mean? Well, if we come down here, we can see we have show login option here is this is a variable. So if we look at our index, we can see we just have a top bar here and it's kind of just blank. Okay, but here we can see that there's actually a value passed in, which is full screen header is the value. So we go back to top bar, and full screen header is a value here. So you can see when we have our components, we can actually pass variables around. And show login option is basically deciding whether or not we show the sign in and the log out button. Now, why might you not want to do that? Well, if I play the game, we still have the sign in option there. If I come out here to the home page, we still have the sign in option, and we still have the sign in option here. But when I press sign in, we don't want to show the sign in button anymore. Okay, so if I go to our login.view, you can see WP top bar now has show login option is false. Okay, so we've got this custom component. We can pass variables on it. Depending on the situation, we might show different values here. So that's the show login option. And then we also need to check, is the user logged in? So we've got this function that basically does something. Let's not worry about what it is now, but it checks if the user is logged in. And if the user is logged in, they show the option to log out. And if the user is not logged in, they show the option to sign in. Right, so this is how we get our behavior, where if I sign in here, and I should be able to sign in as a user I created earlier. Okay, now it shows log out. So you can kind of get a sense with Vue how we're creating our dynamic page here. Okay, so we're kind of approaching 20 minutes on this video. I don't want to go too much deeper. The important thing is I wanted to give a whirlwind tour of Vue.js. Like I said, I think you should go check out the documentation. That's probably the best thing to do whenever you're exploring a new piece of technology. And you can come in here and you can start making changes, and you can see in real time how the website gets updated, and then you can actually use some of the tools here like the linters. You can watch the logs. One thing I should actually show is if in our index view, let's log out. Now what if I do this, right? Now that's invalid, right? What I've just done is opened a comment but I haven't closed it. So that kind of invalidates the whole thing here. So if I go back to my page now, okay, nothing has changed on my page. And nothing has changed here because I haven't saved. Now I save, and oh, all of a sudden we see an error here. Div has no matching tag. We go to our browser. Uh-oh, we get a whole big error here. And it's telling us in index.view we have an issue. And we know what the issue is because we caused the issue. But basically you can look in the browser and you can look in your logs. And here we'll say div has no matching end tag. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means this div tag is opened and closed. So it's not that one. This one is opened but never closed because this is the closing div tag. But because we commented everything out, this is just reading it as a tag being opened. Another tag is open and closed, and then this tag is never closed. Okay, so we can fix that up. and hey, we're good to go again. So play around, and even if you make mistakes, you should get some clear kind of errors and explanations of what's going on there. So, like I said, explore, make some changes to the code, see what happens. You can even make some tweaks to the website, to the behavior, if you like. If you're familiar with Vue.js, you might be able to go in and do something a bit more advanced. But this is really just about, I think the best thing to do is start at index and go through and say, well, I've got the top bar and we've already explored the top bar a little bit. So what you should do now is go to, well, what is WP-VCG intro? Okay, well, let's go over to our components because we know it begins with WP. It's one of our components. We see VCG intro.view. And here we start to see some text. And if we go back to our homepage, some of this text should be pretty familiar. We're seeing things like online gaming from the comfort of your browser, right? So now we're seeing how this page is actually being built up, right? We've got things like enter email address and, oh, what's this? Key up, enter, redirect to register. If we type in something here and press enter, it's going to hit the enter. It's going to hit the button for us. So what I want you to do is, like I said, just go through, explore, make some changes like we did with the top bar. Have a look at some of the other components and just go in and see if you can pick them apart. As always, questions in the comment section. You can join the Discord. I'll be hanging around there available to answer questions. That's it for this video. If there's something specific you would like me to cover, please leave it in the comments as well. If you're following along, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you get all of the updates when new videos are posted. And next time, what we are going to do is finally look at the overall system architecture. So things might get a bit complicated with that one, but we'll try and keep it as easy as possible. And we'll get into some actual hands-on tasks. So let's do a bit of live coding so we can actually see what that looks like in real time. That's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.